Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. It is Monday, July 11th, 2016. Tonight's a pretty simple webinar. There are a couple of readings that we use in the field. These are just tools that we use. We use them with parents, and we also use them with our clients and students. And so I had the therapist ask me if I'd be willing to do kind of these segmented webinars where I'm going to be sharing various resources. So I'll be doing a few of those coming up here in the coming weeks. Tonight we're going to take two separate short readings. One is The Perfect High, and that's a poem by Shel Silverstein. And first we're going to get to a quote that we call The Perfect Parent. And it really comes from an old quote, an old book. And I've looked for the original source and the original author. All I can do is find the name. And I can't find anything else about it. But it's a very wise quote. It's something that I've used for over 20 years. There's a small part of this that's quoted both in my book and also in Chrissy Pozitek's book, The Parallel Process. And so it's something that we often in parent education and these kind of programs refer to often. So I'll get right to that first one. It starts off like this. There's no question but that our parents failed us as parents. All parents failed their children, and ours were no exception. No parent is ever adequate enough for the job of being a parent, and there's no way not to fail at it. No parent ever has enough love or wisdom or maturity or patience. No parent ever succeeds completely. As kids, we needed more mothering than our mothers could give us, more fathering than our fathers had to offer, more brothering and sistering than we got from our siblings. Part of the task in growing up thus becomes finding our own sources of parenting. We cannot wait for our parents' permission to grow up. We need to decide on our own to find other people to parent us, to find other people to give us what our parents couldn't. To grow up isn't easy, but in order to do that, we must forgive our parents. We must forgive them for our sakes, not theirs. When we do not forgive them, we are still expecting all of our parenting from them. We are clinging to them in the hope that if we wait long enough or do enough of the right things or make them feel guilty enough, they will finally come through with enough parenting for us. But this is impossible, and in order for us to be really free and to find other sources of parenting, we must forgive. I would often read this at the beginning of our parent groups that we ran for years and years at the end of the program when we had a slightly different structure. And I would ask people about their reaction to it. And some people, a few people would be agitated by it, would feel blamed by it, would feel like it was accusing them of something. Many parents struggled because they didn't see their parents in this way. They saw their parents as essentially near perfect, right, without any significant or observable flaws. But the reason I read it, and how most people responded was, it for me is a reading of liberation. It's letting go for all of us of that idea that we can get it perfect, and that we have to get it perfect, and that that's what our children need from us, is to get it perfect. And when we can abandon the idea that we can get it perfect or that we need to get it perfect, we can allow ourselves to show up as imperfect, as human, accountable. We're going to allow our children to be upset with us. We're not going to tell them what they can and can't be upset about with us. We're not going to be defensive when they get angry with us or hurt. We're not going to need to tell our side of the story or to justify our story. We just make it possible to give them that space. Like I always say, you can't be perfect. It's not what our children need. What they need is for you to own your project. They need for you, for me. They need us to make our lives our project and to give their lives back to them. They need us to work on accountability, to look at ourselves, to look at our mistakes, to have the courage, the esteem to be able to see our imperfections, to be able to be accountable for our mistakes, but not to own their mistakes, to have empathy for how we affected them, but not to be responsible ultimately for the outcome in their lives. Those are the kinds of things that they need. And this mentality, this reading, for me, sets that stage, sets that agenda. I think for me, this leads to or is related to the most important assignment that a client does in our program, and that is the letter of accountability that a child writes to a parent. I've said this over and over again throughout the years, that I think that's the hardest letter to write well. It's one of the hardest letters to receive well if you're the parent. And it gets confused by both the sender and the receiver as blame, as a lack of accountability. In reality, the first place that we want to start with our clients, with our children, is how did your parents hurt you? What left a mark? What was disappointing, sad, hurtful, painful in your childhood? Can you start to sort that out? Can you learn to get clear of some of that? Can you express it to them in an assertive, non-blaming, but powerful way? And then can you move through it? All right? That's the work. That's essentially, without oversimplifying it, that's one of the broad strokes of therapy. And the reason why we do it with parents first, not with boyfriends and girlfriends and friends at schools and teachers, and all of those things figure into the equation. And for some students, of course, there's significant traumas from those other people in their life. But the safest person, the one that is our context, the parent that we grew up with, that's the stuff we need to get clear about and get clear with and be able to express and move through. And so I know more about people's accountability when they write the impact letter to their parents than I do when they write the letter of accountability. Because the letter of accountability can be easily faked. Can be easily saying things that people want to hear. Can be lip service. But a good letter, a good impact letter to parents, it's hard to maintain that assertiveness without blame and keep it authentic at the same time. Not apologizing, not making it nice. And then for the parent, it's really, for me, my most important letter to help them learn how to respond to it in a healthy way, in a listening way. You don't have to take it all on. You don't have to agree with it. You don't have to debate the specifics. You just hear it and reflect and empathize and own what you can. So that's, for me, what this first reading sets up. We have the students read it. We have the parents read it often. Obviously, it's in my book and in Chrissy's book. So it's definitely one of the bricks, if you will, that is at the foundation of our program, of our thinking. This is a poem by Shel Silverstein. It's quite a few pages, so bear with me. But I think that there's a lot of wisdom in it. Some of you may have read it before. It's like Shel Silverstein, it's provocative and fun. I read when I was preparing for this that he wrote this after the death of his brother. I had never heard that before. There once was a boy named Gimme Some Roy. He was nothing like me or you, 'cause laying back and getting high was all he cared to do. As a kid, he sat in the cellar, sniffing airplane glue, and then he smoked bananas, which was then the thing to do. He tried aspirin and Coca-Cola, breathed helium on the sly, and his life was just one endless search to find that perfect high. But the grass just made him want to lay back and eat chocolate chip pizza all night, and the great things he wrote while he was stoned looked like shit in the morning light. And speed just made him rap all day, reds just laid him back, and cocaine rose was sweet to his nose, but the price nearly broke his back. He tried PCP and THC, but they didn't quite do the trick. And poppers nearly blew his heart, and mushrooms made him sick. Acid made him see the light, but he couldn't remember it long. And hashish was just a little too weak, and smack was way too strong. And quaaludes made him stumble, and booze just made him cry, till he heard of a cat named Baba Fats, who knew of the perfect high. Now Baba Fats was a hermit cat who lived up in Nepal, high on a craggy mountain top, up on a sheer and icy wall. But hell, says Roy, I'm a healthy boy, and I'll crawl or climb or fly. But I'll find that guru who'll give me the clue as to what's the perfect high. So out and off goes Gimme Some Roy to the land that knows no time, up a trail no man could conquer, to a cliff no man could climb. For 14 years he tries that cliff, then back down again he slides, then sits and cries and climbs again, pursuing the perfect high. He's grinding his teeth, he's coughing blood, he's aching and shaking and weak. As starving, as sore, and bleeding and tore, he reaches the mountain peak. And his eyes blink red like a snow-blind wolf, and he snarls the snarl of a rat, as there in a perfect repose, and wearing no clothes, sits the godlike Baba Fats. What's happening, Fats, says Roy with joy. I've come to state my biz. I hear you're hip to the perfect trip. Please tell me what it is. For you can see, says Roy to he, that I'm about to die. So for my last ride, Fats, how can I achieve the perfect high? Well, my dog, says Baba Fats. Well, dog, my cats, says Baba Fats. Here's one more burnt-out soul who's looking for some alchemist to turn his trip to gold. But you won't find it in no dealer's stash or on no druggist's shelf. Son, if you would seek the perfect high, find it in yourself. While you jive, mother effer, screamed Gimme Some Roy, I've climbed through rain and sleet. I've lost 3 fingers off my hands and 4 toes off my feet. I braved the lair of the polar bear and tasted the maggot's kiss. Now you tell me the high is in myself. What kind of shit is this? My ears, 'fore they froze off, says Roy, had heard all kind of crap, but I didn't climb for 14 years to listen to that sophomore rap. And I didn't crawl up here to hear that the high is on the natch. So you tell me where the real stuff is, or I'll kill your guru ass. Okay, says Baba Fats, you're forcing it out of me. There's a land beyond the sun that's known as Zabali, a wretched land of stone and sand where snakes and buzzards scream, and in the devil's garden blooms the mystic tutu tree. And every 10 years it blooms one flower as wide as the Key West sky. And he who eats the tutu flower will know the perfect high. For the rush comes on like a tidal wave, and it hits like the blazing sun. And the high, it lasts a lifetime, and the down don't ever come. But the Zabali land is ruled by a giant who stands 12 cubits high. With eyes of red in his 100 heads, he waits for the passers-by. And you must slay the red-eyed giant and swim the river of slime, where the mucus beasts, they wait to feast on those who journey by. And if you survive the giant and the beasts and swim that slimy sea, there's a blood-drinking witch who sharpens her teeth as she guards the tutu tree. To hell with your witches and giants, laughs Roy. To hell with the beasts of the sea. As long as the tutu flower blooms, some hope still blooms for me. And with tears of joy in his snow-blind eye, Roy hands the guru a 5. Then back down the icy mountain he crawls, pursuing the perfect high. Well, that is that, says Baba Fat, sitting back down on his stone, facing another 1,000 years of talking to God alone. It seems, Lord, says Fats, it's always the same. Old men or bright-eyed youth, it's always easier to sell them some shit than to give them the truth. So this is not unlike many ideas that we think about when we think about self-medicating, when we think about addiction, but I don't want to lose its application to us, to those of us who might not have a problem with physical medicators, with alcohol or drugs, and to recognize that there's a lesson in it for all of us. That sometimes, when I do parent education, when I'm talking to parents, in fact, it happened the other way just the other night, and I'm teaching something, parents are often looking for that shortcut, that magic bullet. And that's not the way that it works. They're looking for, in fact, sometimes their child to give them back their serenity or happiness. And really what it is, it's a change in you that occurs. It's a change in sensibilities. And that means it's not a diet, it's not a fad, it's not a fix. It's a new way of thinking and being in relationship to ourselves, to our problems, to our children, and to their problems. And so we all are tempted to escape. We all are tempted for shortcuts. We all are tempted for a fix, for an answer. We're tempted. We're looking to experts. We're looking to somebody to give us the answer. But like Baba Fats, the answer is inside of you. The answer is lost inside of you. It's lost inside of me, for me. And a therapist or a teacher, if we allow them to, can help guide us so that we can find it inside of ourselves. And it's okay to stumble and fall and backslide and regress. It's okay to do all of that. But the large arc of the story is that we have a work to do. We have to change ourselves. And that we can't change other people, can't change other things. See, for the codependent parent, for us codependents, the child and his or her health becomes our drug. It becomes the thing outside of us that we think will save us, will bring us joy. And as a father of 4, knowing how much I love my children, I can easily fall into that trap. But the work that I do, the books that I read, the therapy that I go to, the meetings that I attend, even the work that I do with you is a constant reminder to look back in myself. I said something happened the other night that was just the opposite of what I'm describing. What that was is I did the webinar on Johari's window. I think it was Johari's window. But anyway, at the end of it, at the end of the parent... Oh, I told the story. That's what it was. I told the way of the peaceful word, and I told the story of the farmer who lost a horse, and his neighbors thought it was bad news, and he said, could be good, could be bad, too early to tell. And then the horse came back with a whole herd of horses, and the neighbor said, that's great news, and he said, could be good, could be bad, too early to tell. And a series of events unfolded where everybody was deciding this was bad news, this was good news, and the farmer himself was wise enough to think, we'll see. And then at the end of the webinar, some parent asked a question and talked about their 18-year-old child walking away from their aftercare program and some friend, some neighbor taking the child in, having not consulted with the parents themselves. And I was expecting to kind of console the parent and to talk about the grief and the loss of control. But the parent ended their question with, Is this an example where I can apply that to myself? Where I can apply the lesson of could be good, could be bad, too early to tell. And I was so happy and thrilled that they applied that, because sometimes we miss that. Sometimes when I do this, the parents are always hearing it as, what's the lesson for my child? What nugget are you going to give me? What answer are you going to give me? What magic turn, magic lever are you going to offer to me that I can apply to fix my child? I've had webinars where I've spent the entire time talking about internal locus of control. And the questions at the end of that is, what I do makes the biggest difference for my happiness. And I've had parents at the end of that webinar sometimes say to me, how can I get my child to see this? When the lesson wasn't for the child. So we do that. I do that. You do that. We do that. We're tempted to do that. So all of the stuff that we do is a constant reminder to get back on your side of the street, to work on changing you, to work on finding that high, finding that peace, finding that balance, finding that serenity inside of you, just like the poem of Baba Fats. And of course, we can see its application to people who use chemicals, right? They're looking for the short answer. The things that are addictive in our life have a ratio of low energy input and high payoff. And the closer the payoff is, the more significant the payoff is, and the closer it is to the attempt to the swallowing of the pill, to the attempt to do it, the more addictive it's considered. And so this work, all of this work, doing this work with your children, doing this work at Evoke, doing my own work, the difference of this work is the stuff that's hard to get addicted to is you're putting in as much work as you're getting out of it. And I don't want that to sound condescending. I know everybody knows that. But sometimes it's human nature to think about all of these things in the context of how can that help everybody else? How can that help my child, rather than how does it apply to myself? I think it's the difference. I've talked about this, the difference between Western culture and Eastern cultures, the difference between mindfulness. In Western cultures, in Western religions, there tends to be this idea that we can pray away our suffering, that we should focus on the happiness. And Eastern cultures and religions and philosophies often encourage the embracing of all of it, that the joy is just as sweet as the pain, and vice versa, that the joy and the pain are inextricably linked together, that the difficulty and the frustration is part of the want, is part of all of it's part of the same thing. So mindfulness encourages us to embrace all of it and to be richer and more whole. What's the hard truth that we need to hear as parents? Like I said, it's not a fix. I want to burst bubbles as gently as possible without discouraging and say, it's just like a diet. You can't do it for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, 10 months, and then quit. It's just like going to the gym, right? It's not about setting a weight goal of lifting or setting a running goal of being able to run a mile. It's changing the way you think about your body, exercise, food, right? Relaxation, all of those things. It's a difference. So bursting bubbles in our program means that we believe in our program. I've seen it work miracles. I've seen children make an incredible amount of progress. And I would ask you to consider and to expect nothing significant to change except for you. Assume that nobody else in the equation is going to change, and that leaves you with the most important question, which is, what can you do about it? What can you do differently? I remember Mom calling me years ago, telling me about her son had been with me, then he was in an aftercare program, and he was just about ready to graduate, and they went on a visit for colleges. And she started to tell me the story about their tour and some of the things that her son was doing, some of his thoughts around it, and he had some real regressive feelings and thoughts, and his priorities with the different colleges were out of whack, as she saw it, out of balance. And what I was impressed with, that's oftentimes the story I get told, stories like that. But what I was impressed about it is she ended the story like this. She said, it really doesn't matter what he was doing. That's not why I'm telling you the story. What I'm telling you is that I did something different. Normally I would have done X and Y. I would have tried to talk him out of it. I would have tried to explain it with him or debate it. But what I did instead was I listened. And I didn't take it on. And I took my own space, took my own time out, and I let him have it. And he worked it through. But most importantly, I'm telling you that she told me, is because I did something different. That's my favorite kind of story, right? When a parent can say, here's what happened with my child. That happened. That was painful. That was hard. That was scary. I'm learning to respond differently. I'm learning to respond without reacting. I'm learning to respond with replacing fear with curiosity, with replacing anxiety with curiosity, for example, or whatever the new skill, the new insight is. Those are the things that are really exciting. Like I said, it's not a diet. It's a new sensibility. It's being in a different kind of relationship with everything, with the world, with your child, with their problems, with their issues. And that's why it doesn't matter when you go to an Al-Anon meeting or a Codependence Anonymous meeting or a Families Anonymous meeting. You can substitute drinking with any other self-defeating behavior, with depression, with anxiety, with school refusal, with learning differences even. You could say, okay, they're talking about somebody who's drinking, a husband who's drinking, or a son or a daughter who's doing drugs or alcohol. That's not my son or daughter's thing, but what can I do differently? What are the themes? What are the lessons? What are the ideas underneath that? How are they responding to it differently? But oftentimes we're so literal, we're so concrete that the minute somebody says, well, my child's problem is drinking, and another person says, well, my child has Asperger's, doesn't use alcohol or drugs. My child is depressed. My child has an eating disorder. My child is practicing risky, unsafe behaviors. The minute that those differences are identified, I hear a lot of parents say, that's different. There's nothing to learn from that. It doesn't apply to me. People ask me that all the time with me. I have children today. My children are from 8 to 23. And I have 2 in between. And it really is the same principles, the same core principles with all of my children, all of their ages, all of their different circumstances, all of their different strengths and weaknesses, and my wife, and my colleagues, my employees, my partners, all of those things. There are a group of core principles that if I live in that way, that all of these things go better and are more clear and are healthier. If I don't do it, it doesn't go well. And it applies to my 8-year-old and my 45-year-old business partner. So be humble but not humiliated, right? Have enough, work on yourself to the point that you can be teachable, be a student, be coachable, that you don't have to get it right. And when you have those barriers, when you feel humiliated or defensive, it's okay. We all have them. And then you can gently look at those and say, where does it come from? Why do I need to be right? Why do I need to be good? Why do I need to already know everything? Why do I need to not be okay with mistakes and still willing to work on them? Why is that there? It's important. It's as important to look at the barriers to growth and why they're there and where they came from as it is to grow, right? So when you or I stumble, my ideal, the thing I aspire to, is when I struggle with not knowing something, not having the answer, with being afraid to make a decision, whatever it is, being defensive, whatever it is. My goal, my ideal is to look at that gently, without judgment, and say, okay, why is that there? What work do I have to change that from humiliation to humility? To change it from being defensive to becoming a student and being able to listen. Look at your own journey. I mean, that's the invitation over and over again. And I hope I can make that invitation in a way to say, in the early years, people say, well, gosh, you talk about all these lofty ideals and I feel so guilty. And I didn't like that. It wasn't my intention. And I hope that I can share my own struggle, my own vulnerabilities, my own difficulties in parenting with all of you. And that I'm on a journey with it. And if we can do that, we can become accountable without the shame and guilt overlay, right? We can just be accountable. There's no shame in it. We can just be human. I like the idea, if there's an assignment coming out of this, it is to be able to share your vulnerabilities with your kids. I like when parents say, here's what I'm still struggling with. Here's what I don't have figured out. Here's how I still struggle with peer pressure or esteem. And don't give them the answer and how you have figured it out and the little nugget of wisdom that you just share with them where you still and how you still struggle and how you're still vulnerable with them, with other relationships, with other challenges. My wife's parents are declining in health fairly recently, pretty significantly. And it's interesting, and my mother too had a serious accident a couple of years ago, and I've noticed all of these older adults, parents of ours, they're starting to become vulnerable. And they could go a different way, I know that, but they're all saying, I didn't know how to love. I didn't know how to be patient. I was always trying to be right. And they're sharing lots of vulnerabilities and insecurities, and they're honest and they're sweet and they're pure, and they're so easy to be with in that state. Instead of all of the illusion we all try to keep up for ourselves to feel okay. So that's really what, for me, the take-home lesson is from the second thing, from the Give Me Some Roy, from the Perfect High poem, is this idea, this deeper work, this deeper journey that we can all get on, that we can't shortcut, we can't circumvent, and we can't substitute something outside of us to make it okay. All right, that's all I have for tonight, so I'm happy to take any questions. I know it wasn't quite a long one tonight, but how can I best express the difference between blame and accountability? Because accountability is saying, I messed up. Blame is saying, you messed up because I messed up. Accountability is saying, I yelled at you. I can see that I yelled at you, I was impatient. I can see that it hurt your feelings. Blame is, you went out and took a baseball bat to a car across the street because I yelled at you. So accountability is just me showing up. That's why I love that book, The Letters of Juliet. I love it read in succession, after the Knight in Rusty Armor, because she really learns how to be accountable without blame and shame. She really learns how to love. That book teaches you how to love. And so real accountability is just love. It's just a gift. Real accountability is me coming to you saying, here's what I did. I acknowledge it. I'm learning where it's come from. I'm sorry that I hurt you. And I don't need anything back from you. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'd love it, but I'm not asking for it. You don't have to give it. You definitely don't have to give it right away. You don't have to be grateful. You don't have to reciprocate. Accountability is a gift, and it is love, and it's presence, and it's courage, and it's honesty, and it's authentic. It's all of those things. Blame is about whose fault it is. And most of us struggle. Most of us overlap them more than we need to. How can you come from a place of great compassion and love for the other and integrate that with boundaries? Because boundaries are about taking care of me. Boundaries are about what I need. Boundaries are about my limitations. If I was the Buddha, let's just say if I was the Buddha, I would have virtually, or I was the Christ, right? I was God. If I was one of those characters, I would have unlimited compassion, right? I would have unlimited patience. I'm not that. So my compassion is going to come to its limit. So I can say, I can't listen to this right now. I can't have this in my house. I'm not willing to support this. I can't. Boundaries are about self-care. Boundaries aren't about judgment, about me needing to fix you. Boundaries are, this is what I need in my life to feel okay. And I can't control what you do with that. And gosh, if I was more like the Buddha or more like the Christ, more like Muhammad, whomever, I could probably do better, do more, and I can't. So boundaries are about owning my limitations and setting up something around me so that I feel safe. So I feel okay. So I own my serenity, so I make it my project. I wrote a blog on drbradreedy.com called Parental Limitations, how children are affected by parental limitations. I would recommend that to you because that's what it talks about there. It talks about when we bump up against our limitation. Okay, here's our intensives and workshops. We ask all parents to go to the workshops if they possibly can while they're with us. The intensives are for deeper work, 4 to 8 people. Those are the ones that I run. July is full. August is full. So we have openings in September and October coming up. Defining You. That's any adult. It's about codependency, about healing, about wholeness. You can go to our website to find more. We want all parents to go to 6 of these 12-step support groups while their children are with us. They're free. They're everywhere. It's a wonderfully therapeutic, powerful experience for people to go through them. Okay, here's some support groups. I'll be in Toronto in a couple of weeks, New York City. Gregory's running that this week on the 13th. Cassidy Miller is running the Chicago parent meeting on the 28th. I'll be in LA. We're doing a new format in LA. If there's anybody on here from LA, we're going to have a potluck. We're doing it on a Sunday to try to help the LA people out with the traffic. I'm from LA, and so when people say they have traffic, LA has traffic. LA is traffic. So to be sensitive for that, we're doing it on a Sunday afternoon, and the first hour is potluck. So when you RSVP, then we'll tell you what we want you to bring. And there's the address there. And then from 5 to 7 will be a parent group that I will run. And then I'll be running it in Toronto on the 25th. Follow us on social media for announcements, inspirational quotes, and pictures. I've listed the dates for the upcoming Is Pursuits program. These are adventure trips, fun trips for young adults, for families, sober fun. In fact, Michael just got back from one this weekend, the moderator here tonight. So they did a river rafting and they did a mountain biking one this weekend down in Moab. We'll see some videos of that, pictures of that coming up. The book is on paperback, also on audio. Go to our Alumni Foundation book page to buy books. 10% goes to charity, people that can't afford treatment. All right, if there's any last questions, Michael, before I close, I'm happy to take them. And then next webinar is going home after a book. I thought it's a good time of year to do that because some of our summer clients do go home afterwards, so I want to talk about the thinking that goes into that and the planning that goes into that. Tough love seems to be a mantra of dealing with addict children. Is it always the perfect treatment? I don't think about it. Tough love is kind of a dated term. I haven't used that term in a long time. We would talk about healthy detachment, but the hardest thing for all of us in dealing with an addict is to be demonstrating compassion, authenticity, kindness, love, and self-care at the same time, right? So if the tough part of love is the difficulty in facing our own demons, our own struggles, our own shame, that's the tough part of love. Tough love isn't defined by the decision to cut them out, right? That's not the tough part of tough love. That might be the result of healthy boundaries and clarity and so forth and so on, but that's not what it's about. I think it was a word in the 80s and 90s, tough love, a phrase in the 80s and 90s that was used a lot because it encouraged people to do something difficult and to do something uncomfortable. But our thinking today is we don't use that term very often. We don't use it a lot. I have a webinar on healthy detachment that I would encourage you to look at if you want to learn more about what that is and how the decision to, for example, kick a child out of the house or not is not based on what the child, controlling the child and knowing that if I do it one way, it's going to turn out one way. If I do it another way, it's going to turn out another way. What we discover in the process of talking about that with a therapist or a mentor or a sponsor is if I'm trying to control, if I think I can cure or fix it, then that's the problem. So if I'm coming from that mentality, no matter which decision I make, it's going to be unhealthy. But if I'm coming from the healthy boundary place, no matter which decision I make, it's going to be the right one. And then the outcome isn't mine. And that's tough. That's the tough part of tough love, is that letting go. And it's painful, and it's courageous, and it's heroic. It's all those things. Can you define self-care? I have a webinar on self-care too that I really liked it and it was well received. It's feeding myself spiritually, emotionally, physically. It's making sure that I'm okay. It's being responsible for my own okayness. It can be exercise, it can be hobbies, it can be fulfilling myself in work or study or whatever. It can be saying I can't go out tonight with you. It can be saying I can't have marijuana in my house. I'm not okay with a mess. It could be any of those things. When we feel resentment toward other people, that for me, is a trigger that I'm not practicing good self-care. That I'm expecting somebody to take care of me and they're not doing a good job of it. So self-care is healthy self-wellness that I participate in and take responsibility for and don't give over to other people. It doesn't mean in loving relationships we can't be there for each other, but ultimately, at the end of the day, I'm responsible for taking care of myself. My children aren't, and my wife is not. And that's, from that place we can show up also as loving and kind and giving. So the webinar on self-care, there's more to it. And the book, Codependency No More, is also a good reference point. So like I said, this Thursday, we'll be doing, at 7 p.m. Mountain Time, we'll be doing Going Home. If you're thinking about it, considering it, or planning on it already, we'll talk about the thinking that goes into it, the preparation, the ideas at home. Have a great couple of days, and I'll talk to you Thursday night. Bye-bye.